Hello and welcome to another video. Tonight I'm going to be talking about a very big topic, and that is the races of the Elder Scrolls. I have converted all, yes, all of the Elder Scrolls races into 5e. I've made the system work as it does in the games, bringing the mechanics that they use there into 5e rather than trying to sort of approximate them with the systems that already exist. I've created a few new mechanics as well as a complete list of traits for every single race, including languages, lifespan, and a few extra abilities. So with that said, let's get right into it. So I'm going to start with an overview of how you're going to create your Elder Scrolls character in 5e. The first step is, of course, picking your race, and these are separated into three categories: men, elves, and beastmen. And these categories are fairly self-explanatory. Second, you're going to decide whether you want to be some sort of Halloween beastie, vampire, or werewolf, and that'll add a few things to your character. These are quite powerful, so they shouldn't be used super liberally. They should be kept for special characters or high-powered campaigns. Next, you're going to pick your birth sign, and these are going to be tied to the different constellations that the games show in the skill trees, and that will determine what bonuses your character gets to their statistics. You'll also get a secondary sign, which will help you with your skills and proficiencies, much like your background does in normal 5e. And finally, and this is the most different aspect of my conversion, which is you get traits from which divine you worship. So you've got four basic choices: the Divines, the Daedra, Magnus, who is the only known member of the Magna, and the Unfavored Gods. Now, the Unfavored Gods are not a category that exists in the actual Elder Scrolls canon. I made it up, and it includes a few gods that you can also worship that don't really have a place in the other pantheons. And we'll get more into that in a little bit. So let's just start with the races. We're going to start with the stats for the elves. So, amongst the elven races, we have the Altmer, Bosmer, Dunmer, Falmer, Maormer, and Orsimer. And if I've mispronounced any of those, just don't worry about that. So, for the Altmer and all the other elven races, they're usually quite long-lived, and there isn't really a super accurate lifespan ever given for how long elves can live. So I'm doing this based on approximates and what I think makes sense and is good for balancing. We do know that elves rarely live beyond like 400 or 500 years, but it's unknown if this is a biological thing or it's just kind of hard to stay alive that long since somebody will want to kill you after that much time kind of thing. With that said, let's jump right into it, starting off with the Altmer, also known as the High Elves. Altmer have a maximum lifespan of 400, and you'll see that this is longer than any of the other elves listed here, and that's because the Altmer have the most pure blood. They practice eugenics, which means that they have a lot of pure ancestry from ancient elves, and there's a lot of them to live longer. You'll start off with three languages as an Altmer: Altmeri, the language of the Altmer, as you might expect; Aldmeri, which sounds very similar, but they are different: Altmeri, Aldmeri. Very, very distinct, I know. Aldmeri is the ancient language of the elves and was spoken by the Aldmeri, who no longer exist, but their language is still considered to be sacred and superior by the Altmer, who revere their ancestors. And finally, you get Tamrielic, which is also known as Common, and this is the normal tongue that everybody talks in the series. Since you're also going to be getting traits from your signs as well as the god that you worship, these races won't have as many traits as you're used to, and that allows for more customizability within the races without taking away their individuality. So each of these have abilities that I would consider to be sometimes more powerful than those that you'd find in normal 5e races, but you do get less of them. And also some of your traits will be tied to when your character is born and what god they worship. Of course, which god you worship can change, meaning that that trait could also change. With that said, let's get into the two traits which Altmer have. The first is called Specialization. Specialization allows you to turn one of your proficiencies into a double proficiency. So this works like the Bard or Rogue abilities, If you already have a proficiency, you can now double your proficiency bonus when you roll with that proficiency. You should mark this with a check mark or however you can denote it that will tell you what it does. You can also use this trait to gain a new proficiency, a normal one, if you don't want a double proficiency. And the second trait, which the Altmer have, is Magic Sense. Once per day, you can cast Detect Magic. A cool way to represent this form of racial magic sense could be to have your players' eyes glow as they look around, or maybe they gain some kind of different pupil, like a slit or like a W shape, like a squid or something. All right, next up on our list of elves is the Bosmer. Bosmer live to a very respectable age of 300, slightly below the Altmer, but still very high. They get two languages, Bosmeri and Tamrielic, as you might expect, and their two traits are disease resistance and beast speech. Disease resistance gives them resistance to disease. So if there's a check relating to disease, whether it's getting a disease or being affected by one, beast speech is also quite self-explanatory. It's a once a day ability and it allows you to cast speak with animals. I think a really interesting way to represent beast speech might be to have your character begin like growling sort of animalistically in a way that's like normally impossible for a person with a humanoid throat to reproduce. I think that would be an interesting way to represent the Bosmer's beast speech ability. Next are the Dunmer, or the Dark Elves, who also live to an age of 300. The languages that they speak are Dunmeri and Tamrielic, and their two abilities are Fire Resistance and Ancestor's Wrath. Fire Resistance gives you a simple resistance to fire damage, as you might expect, and Ancestor's Wrath is a little more spicy. Once per day, you can choose to set anything flammable around you in a 30-foot radius aflame, dealing 1d4 fire damage per turn until it is put out. So this is a choice 30-foot radius. If it's within that radius, you can choose to have it combust. You can have everything in 30 feet combust or just a few things. And it does 1d4 fire damage until it is put out. Now, this fire does eventually go out on its own. It's not like that magical where it'll just go on forever, but it will last a while. And the exact duration of it is up to your DM. However, it can be put out with non-magical means. So if they jump into some water, it will go out. Now, what this will look like, since it is Ancestor's Wrath, is maybe the ghosts of your character's ancestors come out and begin wielding flaming weapons at your enemies. Our next elf is the Degenerate Falmer. I do also have a normal Falmer race, but we'll be getting to that in the extinct races section. The Degenerate Falmer live only to about 50, and this is likely due to the poor conditions in which they live, but it may also be due to Dwemer tampering or other factors. It is up for you to decide. The languages they speak are Falmeri and Tamrielic. However, it should be noted that normally degenerate Falmer do not speak these languages very proficiently and do not have a very high intelligence. So you're probably not going to be able to hold a conversation with one, but it might understand the word surrender. The two abilities that you get as a degenerate Falmer are enhanced senses. In the absence of light, your ears and nose have become strong, giving you advantage on all checks relating to hearing and smell. However, you cannot see at all. So any kind of visual cues, you're not going to be able to perceive those. And the other ability is Blessing of Frost. Once a day, you can cast Ice Knife at first level, choosing your casting stat for a character creation. And I think a cool way to represent this could be to have your character's hand maybe stretch out, and maybe their fingers could grow like ice talons, and then they like shoot out. That could be a cool way to show this racial ability. The next elven race are the Maormer, or Maormer. It's sort of difficult to tell how to pronounce that. I'm going to say Maormer. And their age is 300, like many of the other elves. These are the Sea Elves. They're known for their ability to build ships and sail around the world. They don't really appear so much in the games. They're in Elder Scrolls Online, but you're not really going to see them in like Skyrim. The languages they speak are Maramari and Tamrielic, and their two abilities are Serpent Magic and Chameleonic Skin. Serpent Magic gives you the ability to speak with snakes, including sea serpents. Now, this is not beast speech. This is not a spell. Your character simply can speak with snakes. That's it. Just you can just do that. Um, so it's sort of like being a parcel tongue from Harry Potter. And for chameleonic skin, what this does, once a day, you can choose to become invisible. Now, what I imagine this to look like is the Maramor maybe, I wouldn't have it be like super flashy, if that makes sense. I don't think you should have them like super quickly having their skin change and like being like an adaptive sort of thing, but more slow and transitional. So instead of having them seem like light is bending around them and be like see-through, I would have it be that they're slowly changing colors as they move to a back wall or something. That could look really cool. And next are the Orsimer, also known as the Orcs. The Orcs have a lifespan of about 600. Now, I'm going to say that again, 600, and you might be wondering what is going on there. That's even higher than the Altmer. Um, it's not really known why, but the Orsimer can live for like thousands of years. This might be because they're so good at combat that they don't fall prey to being killed by an enemy like many other elves do, since they're trained so heartily for combat that they just survive that long. And maybe all elves could live this long if they were raised in such a martial culture. It might be that there's something special about the Orsimer race. It's pretty hard to say, but for whatever reason, it seems like they live quite a bit longer than the other ones, and I've chosen to represent that by giving them an extra 200 years on the Altmer. As for the languages they speak, pretty obvious again, Orcish and Tamrielic. And you get two abilities, Tusks and Berserker Rage. Tusks, this gives you a pretty basic weapon. Your bite deals 1d6 plus strength piercing damage. And the second is Berserker Rage. Once a day, you can choose to take half damage and deal double for one turn. So basically, at the beginning of the initiative order, you can say you're activating this, and any monster that attacks you during that turn only does half damage, doesn't matter what type, doesn't matter um, if it's a weapon, spell, anything, it's halved. You're an orc, you're going to tough it out. And you also deal double on your turn. And after that, the effect is done for the day. So a cool way to represent Berserker Rage would be to have the orc just like grab someone's sword, push it away from them, like catching spells in their hands, just like cool shit like that. And those are our elf races. So moving right along to the humans. First up are the Bretons. The Bretons are half elf and can probably live a quite long time. Again, there isn't like super, there isn't like a document somewhere that says this is how long all the races live. There are some things like that, but there's contradictions between different sources, and there's not really one agreed upon lifespan for any of these. So I'm just doing the best I can, all right. And the Bretons do have elven blood, so I'm letting them live to the age of 190. Now, if you want to say that Bretons don't usually live that long because of disease or combat or other factors, I think that's totally reasonable. I would just say that Bretons perhaps have the potential to live this long, but usually don't. As for the languages that you get as a Breton, this is where it gets a little bit interesting. First, of course, you get Tamrielic, and then you can choose between Bredic, which is the language of the Bretons of High Rock, or the Reach Tongue. So, the Reachmen, you might know them as the Forsworn from Skyrim. They actually speak the Reach tongue, and they are Bretons. So, if you want to have that language and be a member of the Forsworn, you have that option. The Bretons get two abilities, Magic Resistance and Dragon Skin. Magic Resistance gives you resistance to force damage, all force damage. And Dragon Skin, once a day, you can choose to reduce an enemy's spell effect by half. So this is pretty vague and it can be applied many different ways. So for example, if your enemy spell has a duration that's like quite long, like an hour, maybe now it's 30 minutes. If they have an effect that gives them advantage on something, maybe instead of taking the higher value, they get to add the difference between the two rolls halved. So it's like a less good advantage. It could also be, if it's a damage spell, the damage would be halved. So it can be used in a lot of different ways. A good way to represent dragon skin, maybe have the Breton's skin become sort of scaly or maybe elf-like. You could even have some sort of aura around them that looks kind of fey. Next up are the Imperials. The Imperials live to the age of about 80, and this is what I'm going to go for pretty much the rest of the human races. 80 seems about reasonable in a world with magic, but little to no medicine and not a lot of modern machinery to help people live longer. Now, of course, if you want to have humans live a little longer, a little less long, I think that's totally reasonable. But I'm going with 80. The languages that you get as an Imperial are Tamrielic and three others of your choice. And this is essentially replacing one of your abilities by getting extra language choices. And this is due to the Imperials being the center of the empire and thus usually having reason to learn other languages in order to contact other cultures and keep the empire together. And the other ability that you get is Voice of the Emperor. Once per day, you can roll Persuasion to calm everything in a 30-foot radius around you, which can feel calm. So you don't have to use this on everything around you. If there's something within 30 feet and you don't want it to be calm, it doesn't have to target everything. You can select who is affected. And that provision can feel calm is important because if it's, for example, a Dwemer mech or some kind of Daedra that is incapable of feeling that emotion for whatever reason, this is not going to work at all. So you can't use this to just calm down everything, but it can be used to calm down like sentient organic beings. So you should keep that in mind if you're the DM. A great way to represent the voice of the Emperor is to tell the player, do like a really cool epic voice and say what you were going to say. And then it'll sort of seem like they're having this big moment where they're, using their voice to like really affect what's going on. Next up are the Nords. They live to about 80, and the languages that they get are Nordic and Tamrielic. Their two abilities are Frost Resistance and Battle Cry. Frost Resistance gives you resistance to cold damage, and Battle Cry is once a day, you can roll Intimidation to frighten everything in a 30-foot radius around you, which can feel fear. So this is just the same as the Imperial, but just fear instead of calm. And again, it's important to note that this won't work on robots and other creatures that cannot feel fear. A good way to represent Battle Cry is describing the sound, because it's actually usually like pretty cringe for players when you have one of the players or yourself like scream or shout, because it like kind of freaks people out. So a good way to do it instead is to describe like this horrifying screech that curdles everyone's blood. And finally, we have the Red Guards. Once again, they live to 80, and their languages are Tamrielic and Yokul. They gain poison resistance and adrenaline rush. So the Red Guards have resistance to poison damage, and what Adrenaline Rush does, once per day, you can choose to take an extra action on your turn. So this is quite a powerful ability. It essentially just gives you a second normal action. What this could look like, a good way to represent this and make it seem really cool, is have the Red Guard like blurring around, moving so fast nobody can see him, or maybe even leaving an after image, like an anime kind of thing, like they're just fighting his after image, he's not even there. And with humans done, we move on to Beastmen. First of the Beastmen, my favorite, my heart and soul, my favorite boys, the Argonians. Their maximum age is determined by the Hist. So Argonians are created by a race of weird sentient trees, and they're created for specific purposes. So every Argonian should have a different lifespan because they're just made to do different things. So you should kind of decide like what purpose your Argonian was built for, and then that'll give you your lifespan probably. So if you're like a laborer, probably not that long. Warrior, probably not that long. If you're supposed to be some kind of administrator, you probably are going to live a quite long time. And if the tree made you as a mage, you might even be longer lived than an elf. The languages that you get are Gel and Tamrielic, and you get water breathing and hist skin as abilities. Water breathing is pretty self-explanatory. You can breathe underwater. Argonians have gills. There you go. And lungs. They can also breathe. You can also breathe on land. I don't think I need to say that, but you can. For hist skin, once per day, you can choose to immediately regenerate 20% of your health. Now, 5e usually doesn't use percentages, but in this case, I think it's kind of exciting that you get to do a percentage there, You figure out what it is. It's the special value that's only applies to your character and their health. And I also think it's a really interesting trait because your players are probably going to forget to recalculate it once they level up. And so there's going to be this cool moment in your campaign where they're going to heal, but it's not really the full amount because they didn't factor in leveling up. And you can tell them, don't forget you didn't update it when you leveled up. And they're going to be like, oh my God, wait, more healing. And then they're going to be like, oh, I'm supercharged now, like this was my saving grace. So there can be cool moments like that. And as for how to represent it, I would say maybe have sort of roots bulge out of the Argonian. Maybe they're like veins, but they look like roots to sort of emphasize the power of the Hist that they're calling on. Next up are the Khajiit. Your maximum age is dependent on the phase of the moon at your birth. Now, here's the thing about the Khajiit. Everybody talks about this. It's like the most basic fun fact about the Elder Scrolls. The Khajiit that we see are not the full story about the Khajiit. The Khajiit actually have like a bunch of different body types they can take on. Some look like saber cats, some are like house cats, some are the humanoid ones that we see. And it's all determined by the phase of the moon when they're born. Now I can't really fully represent that because I'd have to make like 50 different sub races for the Khajiit, and your players are probably just going to want to play the humanoid one. But these ones are vague enough where you can pretty easily homebrew it and you can figure it out. The languages that you get are Tagra and Tamrielic. You get your claws, which allow you to do unarmed strikes, and you get night vision. This gives you the ability to see perfectly in the dark. So these are both vague enough where they could be applied to really any of the moon phase forms. They're best suited to the bigger ones, since claws dealing 1d6 plus strength for a normal sized cat is a little much, but you can figure it out. The Khajiit abilities aren't super flashy, but you can make night vision still look cool by having the Khajiit sort of point something out that nobody else could see. So, and you can make these up really quickly. So instead of having the group of your players, they're looking for somebody in the dark, they turn to the Khajiit member, they're like, hey, what's he look like? Instead of saying, oh, he's this guy and he has this on, you could say, oh, he's this guy and he's wearing these colored buttons and he's exactly this tall, and you can see that he's holding a pencil in his left hand and it's moving slightly. Have it be like super accurate so that it's badass. Our next beastmen are the Slodes, the sort of like leech frog people. Their maximum age is indefinite. They do not die until killed. Their languages are Daedric and Tamrielic. And the two abilities that you get with them are the Coral Navigator. In water, your movement speed is 60. And Thracian Necromancy. Once per day, you can cast Toll the Dead. And the way that you could have this look maybe is the slowed, like maybe infesting the corpse with their leech-like limbs. I think that could be really creepy and interesting. And our last beastman are the Seishi. The Seishi are from Akavir, so you probably won't be seeing them in your campaign, but maybe, depending on the time period, you could have more of them. Their maximum age is 80. Now, oh boy, this one. The Seishi are pretty shrouded in mystery, as are many things in the Elder Scrolls. Nobody really knows what the hell's going on with them. I'm just going with 80. I don't want to think about it any more than that. If you want them to be a different age, do it. And the languages they speak are Akaviri, Tamrielic, and Seishi. Your abilities are form change. You can switch between three forms, human, naga, and snake. In human form, you look like a normal human. In snake form, you cannot use any equipment, but you have a poisonous bite and advantage to stealth rolls. And I let the DM decide like how virulent this poison is going to be. Seishi characters, that's a pretty unusual race. If a person's playing this, they may want to have a lot of power, but it's really up to you. In Naga form, and this is like your top half human, bottom half snake form, you also have the poisonous bite, and your land speed is 45, and in water, it's also 45. So this is kind of the best of both worlds, except you don't get the stealth advantage in this form, and you can't fit in with normal humans. So really the advantages between all of these are human, you can move amongst humans and not be conspicuous. Snake, you're small and can hide. Everything else you would want to do, Naga is best for. Next, we're going to be talking about some of the extinct races. Now, these would most commonly be vampires in the modern setting, which is where a lot of your games will probably take place. But you could also run like a survivor from an ancient apocalypse, or there's different ways you can do it, but these are usually going to be vampires. First, we'll take a look at some of the ancient elves that are extinct by the time of the modern setting. First are the Aldmer, not Altmer, but Aldmer. They have a maximum age of 300, and their languages are Aldmeri and Tamrielic. Now, you might think that Tamrielic would be a weird choice for this. The only reason I include Tamrielic with all of these is just because your game's going to be needlessly complicated if they don't have Tamrielic. If you want them to not have it, I mean, you go for it, but it just seems like it's going to cause a bunch of headaches. So I'm giving it to them. And the two abilities you get with Aldmer are City Navigation and Magic Sense. City Navigation gives you a perfect memory for the layout of cities, as long as you've been to them or been around them for a little bit. And for Magic Sense, this is just the same as the Aldmer. Next are the Sinistra. I really recommend you don't use the Sinistra because there's a lot of weird stuff with them. The lore is like very weird. But hey, it's not up to me. I just make the stuff. The Sinistra, you get a maximum age of 300. Languages are Sinistral and Tamrielic. And your two abilities, one Kalpa removed and Sinister Aura. One Kalpa removed gives you a double proficiency or a new proficiency based on what you did in the world's last cycle. So this one's pretty interesting. And Sinister Aura, once per day, you can roll Intimidation to frighten everything in a 30-foot radius around you, which can feel fear. And this is much like the Nord battle cry. Next are the non-degenerate Falmer, and they have a lifespan of 300 once again. Their languages are Falmeri and Tamrielic, and they gain Frost Resistance, which gives you resistance to cold damage, and Blessing of Frost, which allows you to cast Ice Knife at first level, just like the degenerate Falmer. Now, that provision that I spoke about earlier of Falmer not speaking their languages very proficiently does not apply, of course, to the normal Falmer, who are just normal elves, pretty much. Next are the Iliads, again 300-year lifespan, and they speak Ilidun and Tamrielic. These are actually my favorite name for the races. The Argonians are my favorite, but the Iliad name is so cool. I just love that name. And the two traits that you get for this are Slaver Empire and Light Brings Magic. Slaver Empire gives you advantage to all charisma checks with those of lower status to you, and you can sort of take on a snobbish voice when you do that. I think that would probably be best. Light Brings Magic gives you a once-a-day cast of Dancing Lights. The Iliads really respected light magic. Next are the Atmorans. Atmorans live to about 80, and their languages are Atmoran, Dovazul, and Tamrielic. And the reason I'm giving them Dovazul is because they worship dragons and thus could have learned it. And it's just cool. You get Frost Resistance, which gives you resistance to cold damage, and Rallying Cry. Once a day, you can roll Performance to inspire everything in a 30-foot radius around you, which can feel inspired. So similar to the Imperial's ability. Next, we have the Dwemer, maximum age of 300, just like the other elves, and their languages are Dwemeri and Tamrielic. They also gain an ability that gives them sort of a variant language, and this is Machine Speech. Once a day, you can cast a variant of Speak with Animals, which allows you to commune with machines instead of beasts. And your other ability is Tonal Architecture, which allows you to, once a day, cast Remote Access. Remote Access is a Unearthed Arcana spell, so you'll have to look a bit for that, but basically it allows you to control machines. And if you don't want to use that specific spell, you can just say that once a day they can control a machine. What I imagine this to look like is that maybe the Dwemer have some kind of cybernetic implants which glow, and then the machine glows and now they have control of it. That could be cool. Next are the Chimer, the golden-skinned elves who became the Dark Elves. Their maximum age is 300. They get the languages of Dunmeri and Tamrielic, and they get lightning resistance, which gives you resistance to lightning damage. They also gain the Ancestor's Wrath ability from the Dunmer, which allows you to set anything flammable around you in a 30-foot radius of flame, dealing 1d4 fire damage per turn until it is put out. And the same reservations that I talked about with this ability for the Dunmer applies to the Chimer. Next, we have the Yokudans, who live to about 80, and their languages are Tamrielic and Yoku. Your two abilities are Magic Wary and Adrenaline Rush. Magic Wary, you have advantage on checks against magic attempting to charm, trick, or frighten you. And you get Adrenaline Rush, which allows you once a day to take an extra action on your turn, just like the Red Guards, who are descended from the Yokudans. And next are the Needs, who eventually became the Imperials. And they live to be around 80, and their languages are Nedic and Tamrielic. Two abilities are Alessia's Gift and Voice of the Empress. Alessia's Gift gives you advantage against intimidation attempts, and Voice of the Empress allows you to once a day roll Persuasion to calm everything in a 30-foot radius around you, which can feel calm. So this is just identical to the Imperial's ability, but this one I think you want to represent as more of like they're calling on their glorious memories of the Empress Alessia rather than just like having a badass voice and convincing everyone to be calm. And finally, our last extinct race, the Kothringi. The Kothringi were silver-skinned humans. They're very weird. There's not really a lot about them, so I made some of it up. Their maximum age is 80. The languages you get are Kothri and Tamrielic, and your two abilities are Hornblowers and Voice of the Beastmaster. So Hornblowers gives you proficiency with an instrument of your choice, and Voice of the Beastmaster allows you once a day to roll animal handling to temporarily tame up to 4 beasts surrounding you for 2 hours. So this is kind of like an animal friendship sort of ability, but you want to use this within reason. So you can't just Voice of the Beastmaster somebody else's pet and take it from them. But this could work on like 4 wolves who want to eat you. You know, they just walk out of the forest. So owned animals probably aren't going to respond to this, but wild animals will. And how you want to represent this is maybe your character like shouts at the animal after it growls at them and sort of intimidates it into joining them in sort of a display of savage power. All right. Now that we've covered the present day and extinct races, we're going to move on to the birth signs. So the first are your major signs, and you get to pick one of these as your major main sign and one as your minor main sign. And there are 6 choices, and these will determine what your stat boosts are for your character. These aren't determined by your race here, but they're rather drawing from the constellations which form the different signs under which people can be born, and these are usually present in the games as skill trees. So, these are your different choices. The Atronach, the Lord, the Lover, the Mage, the Thief, and the Warrior. And each of these corresponds to a different stat. So the Atronach is Constitution, the Lord is Wisdom, the Lover is Charisma, the Mage is Intelligence, the Thief is Dexterity, and the Warrior is Strength. And whichever one of these you pick as your major sign, you get a +2 to that stat, and whichever one is your minor sign, you get a +1 to it. As for your secondary signs, you only pick one of these, and there are 7 choices, and these will cover basically the backgrounds available to your Elder Scrolls players. They are the Apprentice, the Lady, the Ritual, the Serpent, the Shadow, the Steed, and the Tower. So if you choose the Apprentice, you're getting proficiency in Insight, Investigation, and Perception. For the Lady, Acrobatics, Performance, and Persuasion. For the Ritual, Arcana, Medicine, and Religion. For the Shadow, Deception, Sleight of Hand, and Stealth. For the Steed, Animal Handling, Athletics, and Nature. For the Tower, History, Intimidation, and Survival. Now you might notice that I skipped over the Serpent. This is going to be a special sign. The Serpent is essentially like a really bad sign to be born under, and it usually makes you cursed. So this could be a really interesting element for your player to have. Basically, if you are born under the sign of the Serpent in this system, you are followed by something called the Star Curse. And this is essentially a spirit companion or maybe just an omen that follows you around, which may sometimes prove to be useful and other times prove to be hindering, and perhaps it might even have some bearing on the larger plot that's going on in your game. So you won't get any proficiencies with this because your character is cursed, and they may be able to use that curse to their advantage, though. So they may be able to use their misfortune to threaten people, like, I'm going to stay in your town and, bad things will start happening if you don't pay me to leave, kind of thing. So it can be used in different ways, but I wouldn't tell your players to pick this one for their first character because it's a bit of a challenge. And finally, we come to the last normal option for your character, and this is going to be which of the gods you worship. Because this is a trait that can change, this is sort of a way that your character can be customized during the game. If you don't want to start out with a religious choice, then you can just do that during gameplay. But if you'd rather start out with one, that's fine too. I would recommend starting with one just so you don't have less power than the other players. So first, we're going to look at the 9 divines. If you choose to worship Akatosh, you have a breath weapon, which does 2d6 plus intelligence, wisdom, or charisma, your choice. And it can either do acid, cold, fire, force, lightning, radiant, or thunder damage. And this will be chosen at character creation or when you get this divine, when you start worshiping them. You can't choose it every single time. It's just you choose it the first time, and then that's what the ability is. The target must make a dex save equal to 8 plus your chosen stat plus your proficiency bonus. Next is RK. Any damage over time or healing over time you inflict, such as poison, fire, or regeneration, is doubled. Dibella, you are very attractive and have advantage on charisma checks against the opposite sex and anyone else who is attracted to you. Julianos, you are well educated on one race's laws and culture in particular, and you have advantage to any intelligence check dealing with that race and their province. This is assuming that the Empire is still together. Kinnereth, you have resistance to an elemental damage of your choice, cold, fire, lightning, or thunder. Mara, you have temporary hit points equal to triple your level each day, which you can distribute between yourself and your allies. Once a number of hit points are given, they cannot be taken back or rearranged. Stendar, every day you roll 1 dice when you wake up. You may substitute the result for one of your rolls that day or for one of your allies' rolls. Talos, you have proficiency in 1 martial weapon of your choice. If you are already proficient in martial weapons, you may gain a double proficiency in one. And Zenithar, anything you sell goes for 25% more. And the way that you should use this is just look at the standard price of any object in the player's handbook and just multiply it by 1.25. Next up is Magnus, only known member of the Magna Gi, very lonely Magnuses. Magnus, if you choose to worship him, you get a first level spell of your choice with the casting stat up to you between intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. So those are the divines and Magna Gi, which is just Magnus. As for the Daedra, that works a little differently. You don't get a trait such as you do with the divines, but you'll rather have one of the items. You will basically be the champion of one of the Daedric princes. And because of that, I have made stats for all the different artifacts, all the Daedric artifacts that have been found in any of the games as of the time that I created the system. So I'm not going to be listing all of those. I'll put them on screen here for like just a second. If you want to look at them, you're looking at them, okay, they're gone. I'll link them below with the rest of this system, and you can look at them in depth there. There's quite a few of them, so I'm not going to be going over them in detail, but the basic gist here is that instead of getting a extra character trait like you are with the Divines or Magnus, you're getting an item that's very powerful instead. So it's a bit of a trade-off there. Now, if 2 of your players both decide to worship the same Daedra, there are a few Daedra in the list who have 2 items listed for them, so that won't be a problem. There are some that don't. If that's the case, you're kind of just going to have to figure that out. What I would suggest doing is just create a new Daedric artifact for one of them, or have them share it. And the last category, the one that I mentioned at the beginning, the unfavored gods. And these are the gods that exist in the world of the Elder Scrolls, but they're not really part of any of the pantheons, and to be honest, they're not really super focused on in the setting. But some of your players might like the obscure lore, and so it's important to have these options. The first one is Mora House, who is seen as one of the ancestor mytho-historical heroes of humanity in the setting of the Elder Scrolls. If you choose to worship him, when you wield a weapon, it is enchanted with 1d4 cold, fire, lightning, or thunder damage, your choice. Riemann, who was one of the old emperors, much like Talos, but just like less cool, I guess. You get the Akaviri language, as well as one ancient and one exotic language of your choice. And finally, Lorcan. You're a Lorcan worshiper. Why are you doing this? You're hated by the Daedra, the Aedra, the Magna don't really like you very much. And to represent this, if you worship Lorcan, you deal double damage against those who worship the divines. Magnus is not included. Now, I didn't include the Daedra in this, first of all, because it would be kind of overpowered, but more importantly, because the Daedra retained their power, and so Lorcan didn't really gain anything from them, right? They didn't help. But the divines, he did actually trick. And so I see this as sort of Lorcan continuing to like dunk on them even past his demise, is that his echoes, which are being worshipped by his followers, offend the divines and so do extra damage to them. Now Magnus is part of the Magna of course, and so he's not part of that. So that won't work for followers of him. And now let's talk about vampires. So just like with normal 5e, you're going to be building your vampire race off of your character's main race. So you don't need to replace any of your traits. You're just going to be adding these to your character. Now, these are very overpowered as vampires are supposed to be quite powerful in the world of the Elder Scrolls. And so if you play a vampire, just expect to be quite powerful. If you want them to be less powerful, you could also put in a rule where your character doesn't get any of either their racial abilities, or maybe they don't get major signs or secondary signs. You could put that in if you want them to be less powerful. But with that, let's start with the vampire statistics. So, right off the bat, for any of the vampire subraces, you get a +2 to your charisma and a +1 to your strength, and you no longer have an age limit since vampires live forever until killed. You also gain the Daedric language. Vampires trace their origin directly to the Daedric lord Molag Bal, and so you're going to know Daedric, probably. The eyes of vampires are black, orange, or red. So this should be noted for your character. Of course, this might make it difficult to hide as a vampire, so you might say that your vampire has some sort of otherworldly charm, or maybe some kind of magical contact lenses that make it so they can hide these, so that they can actually like interact with the main populace. Or you can just have it to it doesn't turn red, orange, or black, and they just are normal eyes, and that's just how it is for them. You gain night vision, the ability to see perfectly in the darkness. You gain a vulnerability to both radiant and fire damage. You gain immunity to necrotic damage since your body's already dead, so can't really rot anymore. You gain resistance to cold damage since you don't feel cold as acutely as a vampire. And you gain another very powerful ability, Unnatural Vitality. So your hit die for your class are upgraded by one stage. So if they're D4s, you go to a D6, D6 to D8, all the way up to D10s to D12s, and D12s to a D12 plus a D4. This also applies when you're leveling up and gaining more health, but it does not apply retroactively, meaning if you get turned into a vampire after you've already leveled up a few times, you don't then go back and roll again and add extra health. You just do it going forward. You also gain an ability called Blood Sense, which gives you advantage on any perception check dealing with the detection of blood, so that you can go, hunt and get the blood. You also gain the ability to drink blood. You must drink blood once a week, or you will die. You gain one ability from the being you drink from per day. So let's say you drink from a Nord, you could take one of the Nord racial abilities for that day. And this is kind of just a fun way to have your character be able to have a preference of what blood they like and have that actually feature in gameplay. Because otherwise, it's just a role play thing. That's fine. But it's cool if it actually does something. And the reason that I made it once a week is not for any lore reason. It's just because that's a point at which you need to do it pretty frequently, but it's not super obnoxious. If you want it to be a different interval, I'd say you could easily do that. Now for the sub races. So for each of these, it's important to note that, so first of all, these sub races are the different power levels of being a vampire. As you're a vampire, as you get older and drink more blood, you become more powerful over time. And so each of these sub races has the abilities of the last. So first up are the weakest vampires, fledglings. Their bite does 1d6 plus strength piercing damage plus 1d4 necrotic, and you regain half of the damage you deal with that attack. You get a form change. You can change into a bat or wolf, and you choose which one at character creation, and then this is your transformation. You have supernatural charisma, which allows you to cast charm person at first level. Charisma is your casting stat for it. And you have sunlight damage. Under any kind of daylight, so not like candlelight or any other forms, uh, just daylight, you take 1d4 fire damage per turn. And remember that this isn't just 1d4 because you do have fire vulnerability, so you're actually going to be taking 1d4 times 2. The next type of vampire is the blooded vampire. Their bite does 1d8 plus strength, piercing, and 2d4 necrotic. And you again regain half of your health. You gain a new form change, allowing you to change into mist. While you are in mist form, you are intangible and cannot be harmed by any form of damage except for cold damage and other more exotic types that might make sense for the situation you're in, like psychic damage or maybe force damage. But as for like fire, slashing, bludgeoning, poison, acid, that's not going to do anything to you. Supernatural charisma for the blooded vampire, you also gain the ability to cast calm emotions at second level. And again, charisma is your casting stat for it. And your sunlight damage also increases. So now, under daylight, you take 2d4 fire damage per turn. And once again, you have fire vulnerability, so this is going to be multiplied by 2. And the last kind of vampire are pure bloods. These are also known as vampire lords. And these are what Harkon's clan is in Skyrim. Your bite deals 1d10 plus strength piercing plus 3d4 necrotic, and you regain half of the damage you deal as health. With form change, you gain a new form, the Elder Vampire form. This gives you resistance to all non-magical damage except from silver or garlic-laced weapons. This form only lasts 3 turns. However, during it, your bite damage is increased to 1d12 plus strength, piercing, plus 4d4 necrotic. You gain the ability to fly with a speed of 30, and all spells that you cast do necrotic damage, which restore your health by the amount dealt, not half. So very powerful. You also gain a new supernatural charisma perk, which allows you to cast hypnotic pattern at 3rd level. And again, charisma is your casting stat for it. And finally, your sunlight damage is increased to 4d4 fire damage per turn while under daylight. So as for the rarity of these, your character could very easily be a fledgling vampire. That's not really that weird. Blooded, it's going to be a little more powerful, but not too crazy. Pure blood, that's going to be a very unique character. You're probably going to need some pretty big backstory for how this character is involved in the plot. And this is usually going to be reserved for bosses or enemy characters. And finally, werewolf characters. So as a werewolf, you get +2 constitution, +1 dexterity. Werewolves, the race functions just like vampires, so you're going to be building this on top of your character's race, just adding these traits. You don't have to replace anything. And they are also overpowered. For your form change, you can change into a lycanthropic form, and your teeth and claws deal 1d8 plus strength piercing damage. You get speed of Herkind, your land speed is doubled, and you gain a climbing speed of 60. You gain unnatural vitality. This increases your hit die by 1 stage, so d4s to d6s, d6s to d8s, d10s to d12s, and d12s to d12 plus 1d4. And much like the vampire, this does not apply retroactively. You get keen senses, which gives you proficiency in perception. And finally, Fellowship of Herkind. Daedra serving Herkind and the animal which your lycanthropic form emulates are friendly to you. So if you're a werewolf, wolves are going to be friendly to you, and Daedra, who serve her kind, will also be friendly towards you. Now, this can change, of course, if you offend her kind. Of course, the Daedra that serve him are no longer going to be friendly to you. They aren't magically compelled to do this. They're just friendly towards you because you being a werewolf marks you as an ally of her kind in their minds. So, there are other lycanthropes in the world of the Elder Scrolls, and you can reskin this race for them. So, for example, the form change, you can just have the 1d8 plus strength piercing be from the teeth of a shark or the beak of an eagle person thing, however you want to do it. And the other ones aren't super specific either. Most of them can be reskinned. So, for example, speed of Herkine, instead of land speed being doubled and getting a climbing speed, maybe you could get a swim speed of 60, like a were shark or something. Just as a reference list, before I close this out, here are all the common languages. You can see the list of them here, the ones that are used in the modern setting um, by the different populations. And of course, these will also be in the document that I'll attach somehow below. And here are the ancient languages. They're pretty cool. Look, there's Eilidune. I love it. It has such a cool name, doesn't it? The Old Bredic there. That's one of the other languages I didn't like really mention. And here are the exotic languages. Your character can only learn these. The only character option that's built that you can get one of these is from worshiping Reman, which is already pretty unusual. So you're not going to see these a lot. Um, But also, you could know one of them for whatever reason. I'd imagine Daedric might be a popular one with your players. Here they are. Daedric, language of the Daedra, Dovazul, language of the dragons, Elnofex, super ancient, fairies, histories, Giantish, which is giants, goblins, which are for goblins, harpies, impish, lamias. So yeah, those are the three sort of very quick language banks that I wanted to show you. All right. So this has been my conversion of all of the Elder Scrolls races into 5e. This took me quite a while, both to film and probably to edit. I haven't edited it yet. Maybe I'll put in a note here. Did it take me long to edit? Well, that was your answer. Okay. Well, thank you for watching. I hope you use some of these races. Let me know if you do. I'd love to hear what you think of them and if they worked for your game, how you used them, if you used them for NPCs or for players. And thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time where I'll be talking a bit more about the lineage of some of these races, and then I'm done with Elder Scrolls and moving on to something else. What is it? Who knows? So fucking stupid. Okay.